Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name's James Fernyhough. I'm the sustainability editor at Politico. And we're talking about AI and the sustainability side of AI. So the sudden advances in large language models have led to an AI arms race. What that means in practical terms is massive investment in computing power, and that means building more data centers. These data centers require huge amounts of energy. A single ChatGPT request requires 10 times as much power as a Google search. And more energy, of course, means higher carbon emissions. Data centers also get very hot and require lots of water to cool them down. And by 2027, the UN estimates AI will use more water than the entire country of Denmark in a year. And there was an interesting piece last week in Bloomberg about how the majority of AI, lots of AI data centers are built in water-stressed areas. As a major player in AI, Microsoft is right in the thick of this. So it's great to have Michelle Patron, General Manager of Global Sustainability, General Sustainability Policy Lead at Microsoft. So thanks so much for joining us. And before we get stuck in, just a reminder to ask your questions through slido.com and to talk about us on X or your social media of choice. So Michelle, back in 2020, Microsoft made headlines when you pledged to be carbon negative by 2030. It was one of the most ambitious goals in the corporate world, I think. And so the idea is you take more carbon out of the atmosphere than you put in. But looking at your emissions report, things don't look like they're going that well. In 2023, your Scope 3 emissions increased by a pretty staggering 30% above 2020 levels. And most of that apparently was to do with data centers. So my first question is the goal of being carbon negative by 2030 dead?
So first of all, thank you so much for inviting me here, and thank you to everyone for joining us. It's really wonderful to see AI and sustainability as part of this conference of tech and AI, because we think it's a really important part of the conversation. So we have two really important inflection points ahead of us right now. One is being on AI, and the other is on sustainability. On AI, we are looking to build capacity and capabilities to provide our customers access to AI so they can increase their productivity, for governments to be able to provide improved services to their citizens, and for NGOs and startups to be able to create breakthroughs in lots of different areas, including healthcare and science. At the same time, over the last 10 years, around the world, and particularly here in Europe, there's been so many advances in sustainability in terms of the addition of renewable and carbon-free energy onto the grid, energy efficiency, that we need to double down on that progress. So this is a right moment for Microsoft in this space, as you mentioned. In 2020, we set these goals. It's 2025. The goals are 2030. So we're at the midpoint. And we have made significant progress across all our goals: carbon negative, water positive, zero waste, and protecting ecosystem. But our business has shifted. And so the question is, where do we go from here? Well, first and foremost, we are very strongly committed to our targets. Our targets remain our goals and our North Star to be carbon negative, water positive, zero waste, and protect as much ecosystem. The next thing is, how do we achieve that? Well, really, we have two big motions. One is continuing to manage the footprint of our data centers when it comes to energy and when it comes to water, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But the second is, how do we leverage AI in order to help us manage our energy, bring more clean energy to the grid, and manage our water? So in the first...
Can I just jump in a second, because the question of your 2030 target of carbon negative, so that's still the goal?
That's still the goal.
And if your emissions are going up 30%, or were up 30%, how does that work?
So you were talking about, first, we're focused on the emissions around our energy use. And so what we do there is that we purchase carbon-free electricity and bring that onto the grid. We've purchased globally 34 gigawatts of solar, wind, nuclear, and other sources.
Which is being built.
It's contracted. Some of it is online, some of it's coming online, and that's being put onto grids where we operate. In Europe, that means 900 megawatts of new solar and wind in Ireland. It means 300 megawatts of solar and wind in Spain. It means 225 of new solar and wind capacity in Germany. So we're committed to continuing to bring on that carbon-free electricity to really manage the emissions, which is scope 2, that's associated with our electricity use for our data centers. The piece on scope 3,
which, just to interject, it's over 90% of your emissions, right? Scope 3.
Scope 3, so when you talk about carbon math here, there's 3 scopes. First scope is associated with our own operations, right? So that's what is coming out of a building.
Scope 2 is electricity use.
Scope 2 is electricity.
Scope 3, which is the entire supply chain, that's something like 95%, I read.
So for most companies, it's the largest, because you think about what a supply chain, it's everything that goes into building the product.
But you are including that in your carbon
That's
negative.
Our carbon negative, which is what was pretty important at the time.
So you can't force people to, we're talking about carbon offsets?
So we're talking about different ways that we're doing this. It's important to know the different ways that we have our supply chain. The first is what goes into making our products. So all of the energy that goes into making our devices, to making the servers in our data centers. And we work really closely with our supply chain to try and help them decarbonize. So we've created guidelines for carbon-free procurement. We're working with our suppliers in countries around the world to decarbonize their grid, including in Asia, where a lot of our supply chain exists and where the grids there are more carbon intensive than they are here in Europe. And then our goal is to reduce that by 50% and then remove the rest.
Okay.
So we're focused on carbon removal. What carbon removal is taking carbon from the air and then storing it for long periods of time. And you do that in 2 ways. One is by engineered solutions. Some of you might have heard of direct air capture. So that's literally sucking the air out, scrubbing it for carbon, and then putting it in the ground. There's enhanced rock weathering and biochar, a lot of different technologies. And then there's also the natural way of doing it, which is creating more forests, creating more oceans so that the air can be absorbed. With that, we have set certain principles to make sure that these are real projects that are taking concrete steps.
Because this has been a real controversy that a lot of carbon offset projects are simply not storing the carbon that they're claiming. So how do you make sure that you are investing in genuine sequestering of carbon? So
this is a new area. But when we started this in 2020, there were no regulations. Now, thankfully, there's the European Union Carbon Removal Certification Framework, which helps provide a lot more certainty in this space. But when we were started, there wasn't. We had to do a request for proposals around the world and set kind of clear guidelines for us. What is additional? How do we verify that this is real? How do we make sure that this is actually reducing carbon instead of using more energy to remove the carbon? And equally important, how does it support local communities? So those are some of the principles that we have created. We're really thrilled that there's now this framework because we've been investing a lot in European projects to be able to do this. We have a project underway in Sweden to be able to purchase from the bioenergy carbon capture storage that they have. One of the first of a kind projects on direct air capture is happening on the European continent in Iceland and St. Climeworks. So that's underway, and that's really been a huge opportunity for Europe to lead in this space.
I'd like to get onto water, if I can, because it's a very water-intensive business, cooling data centers. So between 2020 and 2023, your water use nearly doubled. How much of that was down to data centers?
So water is a priority for us, and we need to use less in our data centers. We do that in a number of different ways. The first is through new technology. So we have been looking at how we can be more water efficient. One way is by creating...
Sorry, just the question I asked, though, was how much of that huge rise, was that all data centers, or...?
I think that the more important thing to look at is how we can drive more efficiency in the water that we're using in our data centers. As we're growing with AI, we need to be able to be more efficient per data center.
So that huge rise, is it not clear what it was?
The majority of our water usage comes from our data center operations.
Thank you.
And so what we are doing is we've looked at a closed loop system, which basically instead of continuing to run new water through the system, we are just using the same water and chemicals to cool. Another exciting development has been direct-to-chip cooling. So traditionally, we'd cool the entire building, and now we're looking at new ways that we can take the water and go directly to the chip. That increases water efficiency. That also increases the energy efficiency. The other thing is that we want to be good stewards in the communities where we operate. So actually one of our 2020 goals is to be water positive. That means that we put more water into the local basins where we operate than we withdraw.
So that I was going to ask actually that question, the idea of, it's sort of like offsetting water rather than carbon, but obviously water is a local resource. So when you say being water positive, is that what was the term you used?
Water positive.
Yeah, so when you're water positive, you're making sure that is going to the community where you're operating?
Well, we operate in the basin where we are in the local areas so that we're
water basin.
replenishing more.
Okay.
And a few examples of that is work that we're doing in Spain, which is water scarce, to try and help both use AI through acoustics of looking at the local, through the local utilities pipe to identify where there are leaks to be able to enable less water loss, and then to work with local farmers on improving the irrigation in their farmland so they have access to more water. Another project that we have underway in Ireland and in Dublin is to work to help make sure that there's less water loss coming from the local river, which I think provides 85% of Dublin's water, but a third of it is lost due to poor leakage. And so to help make sure that there is less loss and more water that's being put back in.
I mean, this is Politico, so we're obsessed with policy, and there's been a lot going on in sustainability policy that will have been affecting you both in the US, where Donald Trump seems to be sort of overseeing a demolition derby of green reporting rules. And over here, it's not been quite so dramatic, but we are seeing a wind back with the omnibus simplification bills that's kind of wound back green reporting. I mean, I found your sustainability report quite transparent and quite easy to use. That's not the case with all companies. Where do you stand on the use of policy? Are you happy to see this winding back, or would you like to see more reporting requirements from the places that you operate?
So we think transparency is an important part of this sustainability initiative, that people can see our progress, we can share where we're not going as well, and where there's been progress. So as you mentioned, we've always been very transparent in putting out these annual reports. We've also been working closely with governments around the world to be able to help inform the reporting. We think it plays an important role. We want to see it be interoperable. So since like a company like Microsoft, and I know there's lots of European companies as well that operate in a lot of jurisdictions, so it's very simple for them to do the same type of reporting everywhere. We also think that digital technologies can play an important role, and so we've been working with different, with policymakers to help create the environment for digital technologies to be used in reporting.
Have you found the sort of whiplash of sort of, the European Commission says you have to do this, and then it's like, actually, hang on, no, we're going to change that. Do you welcome that? Does that make life difficult for you?
We operate in lots of different countries, so we're used to the cadence of policy, and there's always some type of change, and then we adjust.
Okay. I'd like to finish on time. So the last question I'd like to ask you is a sort of big philosophical one. Is AI really worth all of this environmental bother? Or are we locking ourselves into a senseless arms race that will wreck the planet?
So there's an important interconnection, right? As we started, that AI uses resources, but AI also can provide us really super capabilities to discern complex systems, to be able to create new sustainability solutions, and to empower the workforce. It's important to contextualize the use of AI and and how much energy it requires. The International Energy Agency just put out a robust report. They've been looking at this for several months, and they actually say that currently data centers account for 3% of Europe's electricity consumption. So 3%, there's 97% that's coming from other sources. It's going to grow. And so they estimate globally that data centers will account for about 10% of global growth. So it's part of the equation, not all of the equation, but part of the equation. But at the same time, we've seen such exciting data points already, real proof points of how AI can help. Let me give you a few examples. Vestas, right, an energy company in Denmark, they are using AI to adjust the blades in their wind projects. And by adjusting the blades, they get more energy capacity, and they can have 10% more output from their projects. Another example is Line Vision. That is a company that looks at the transmission grid and it tries to see where is there open areas and how can we put more capacity through those lines without having to build new electricity grids. And so they've done that, and one utility, National Grid in the UK, was able to find enough capacity to move the 600 megawatts of electricity that were coming online from a new offshore wind project. You know, another example is PKP Energetyka, which is a Polish company and a Polish energy company, and they're using AI to integrate renewables into the power provisions that they give to the Polish rail system. So there's a lot of exciting ways. The IEA estimates that it's 3 times.
So there are things that AI can do that aren't just making images of Donald Trump dressed up as the Pope. Well, that's good to hear. All right, well, I think that was really interesting. Thanks so much. I mean, there's a lot more I would love to ask you, but we've run out of time. So I think the takeaway is that Microsoft is convinced that there are benefits, and it's convinced. I mean, I still have questions about how you're going to get to that carbon negative figure and whether the carbon offsets that you're using or the carbon removals. Actually are removing, because it does still give you a license to emit carbon emissions. But we'll be watching very, you know, I hope you're successful in that. Okay, well, I think we'll leave it there. The next session will take place after a quick stage change. Mathieu Paulet will be moderating a policy spotlight discussion on AI and sustainability, so there'll be more of this to come. But thanks so much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.